My name is Maria, and I am 32 years old. The crystal glass felt cold and heavy in my hand, a stark contrast to the boiling rage simmering just beneath my skin. Across the mahogany expanse of the dining table, my sister Sophia's face was a perfect mask of condescending pity. "Oh, Maria," she sighed, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "There's no shame in it, just admit you're broke, we're family. We just want you to do your part." Her husband, Mark, nodded, a smug smirk playing on his lips as he swirled his ridiculously expensive red wine. My father sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable but his silence a familiar, heavy blanket of disapproval. They thought they had me. They thought this was my breaking point. Little did they know, I had been waiting for this moment, planning for it. And the two small glittering stars hanging from my earlobes, the ones they hadn't even noticed yet, were about to burn their entire world to the ground. You know that feeling when you've been running a marathon for years, but everyone in your life thinks you're just sitting on the couch? That was my existence. It all started in childhood, as these things so often do. My sister Sophia was the sun, and I was the quiet, little moon that only ever reflected her light. She was beautiful, outgoing, and effortlessly charming, the kind of daughter my father could proudly show off. He ran a moderately successful and very traditional manufacturing business, a legacy from his own father. It was all about tangible things, about handshakes and boardrooms, and a certain kind of old-world respectability. Sophia fit right into that world. I, on the other hand, was a dreamer, a reader, a collector of oddities. My sanctuary was our grandmother's attic, a dusty treasure trove of forgotten things. While Sophia was at ballet, I was carefully cataloguing old buttons, reading the faded postmarks on letters from the 1940s, and becoming utterly mesmerized by our grandmother's jewelry box. She had a few lovely pieces, nothing extravagant, but each one had a story. She would let me hold them, telling me about the filigree on a silver locket or the cut of a garnet in a ring she received for her 21st birthday. That's where the seed was planted. I didn't just see pretty objects. I saw history, artistry, and emotion, all captured in metal and stone. To my father, it was frivolous. To my mother, it was a cute but ultimately useless hobby. To Sophia, it was just more proof that I was the weird one. They wanted me to be more like her, to have ambitions they could understand. They pushed me towards sensible careers, like accounting or law, paths that felt as foreign to me as walking on the moon. I tried, I really did, for them. I got a degree in business administration, a sensible choice, and landed a job in a sterile corporate office that felt like a prison for my soul. Every day, I'd sit in my grey cubicle under the hum of fluorescent lights, my mind drifting back to the intricate designs of Art Deco brooches and the deep, velvety blue of a perfect sapphire. My performance was fine, I was competent, but there was no spark, no passion. I was a ghost haunting someone else's life, and the only person who seemed to notice was me. The family, of course, was relieved. Maria was finally on the right track, doing something real. They had no idea that every night after my soul, crushing 9 to 5, I was building my actual life. It started small, with a laptop and a $50 investment in a tarnished silver bracelet I found at a flea market. I spent a week researching its maker's mark, carefully polishing it back to its former glory, and writing a detailed, story-rich description. I listed it online and it sold for $200. It was the most exhilarating feeling I'd ever had. It wasn't about the money, it was the validation. Someone else saw what I saw. That tiny victory was the first brick in the wall of my new life, a life I had to build in secret because I just knew, they would never understand it. They would have called it silly, a waste of time, a little game to distract me from finding a husband. And so, I let them believe I was the dutiful, boring corporate drone, while the real Maria, the passionate, driven entrepreneur, was being born in the quiet hours of the night. My little online hobby grew faster than I could have ever imagined. The first few years were a grind, you know. I'd finish my day job, eat a quick dinner in my small apartment, and then work until 2 or 3 in the morning. My world became a whirlwind of estate sales, obscure auction houses, late-night research, and careful photography. I reinvested every single penny I made. That $200 from the bracelet became a $500 necklace, which then funded the purchase of a small collection of Victorian mourning rings. I learned everything I could, devouring books on gemology, historical periods, and designer signatures. I became an expert not by decree, but by sheer force of will and endless, passionate work. This is when I met Chloe. She was a photographer I hired to help me with some particularly tricky pieces. She had a sharp eye and an even sharper wit. She came over to my apartment, expecting a simple product shoot, and found my living room had been converted into a mini museum and workshop. There were pieces laid out on velvet cloths, reference books stacked to the ceiling, and a professional-grade polishing wheel next to my coffee machine. She took one look around, and instead of being weirded out, her eyes lit up. "Okay," she said, "so this is way cooler than your email let on." For the first time, I told someone everything. I showed her my sales figures, my profit margins, my 5-year plan. She wasn't just impressed, she got it. She understood the vision. Chloe quickly went from a hired contractor to my first real ally, then my business partner. She handled the visual branding, the photography, the website design, leaving me free to focus on sourcing and authentication. We incorporated calling our business Ethel, an old word for heritage and nobility. It felt right. Our reputation began to build within the niche but lucrative world of high-end vintage and antique jewelry. We were known for our meticulous research, our ironclad guarantees of authenticity, and the stories we told about each piece. We weren't just selling jewelry, we were selling history. My income from Ethel quietly eclipsed my corporate salary, then doubled it, then tripled it. I quit the grey cubicle prison, a move I explained to my family as taking a sabbatical to figure things out. They exchanged worried glances, of course. Sophia, ever the helpful sister, would send me links to entry-level administrative jobs. "Just to tide you over, honey," she'd say in that infuriatingly sweet tone. Family dinners became a masterclass in biting my tongue. They were dominated by talk of Mark's latest bonus at the investment bank, the new German car they'd bought, or their upcoming trip to a 5-star resort in Bali. They'd turn to me, sitting there in my simple, unbranded clothes, and ask with genuine, if misplaced, concern, "So, Maria, what have you been up to? Still finding yourself?" I'd just smile and say, "Oh, keeping busy with my little projects." The dramatic irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. One Christmas, Mark cornered me by the fireplace. "Listen, Maria," he said, placing a paternalistic hand on my shoulder. "There's no shame in admitting you need a leg up. I have a friend who manages a call center. It's not glamorous, but it's a steady paycheck. I could make a call." I remember just looking at him. This man whose entire net worth was probably less than the value of the inventory I had stored in a secure, climate-controlled vault, and I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger would come later. At that moment, it was just pity. He was so blinded by his own narrow definition of success that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. I politely declined his generous offer, and he just shook his head, a look of disappointment on his face, as if I were a lost cause. He walked away, and I overheard him whisper to Sophia, "I tried. She's just got no ambition." That was the narrative they'd all agreed upon. Maria, the unambitious, struggling, lost little sister. And for the sake of peace, and to protect the world I was building, I let them believe it. For about 5 years, I lived this strange double life, and it worked. On the one hand, I was poor Maria, the quiet spinster sister with no career prospects who tinkered with her dusty old things. On the other hand, I was the co-owner of Ethel, a multi-million-dollar business with a global client base of serious collectors, museums, and even a few celebrities. Chloe and I ran the entire operation from a sleek, discreet office and high-security warehouse in the city's arts district, a place my family would never in a million years think to visit. We had a small team of trusted employees, a gemologist, a historian, a digital marketing expert. I traveled the world, attending exclusive auctions in Geneva and scouring private collections in Paris, all under the guise of backpacking trips to find myself. It was almost comical. I'd be negotiating a 6-figure deal for a Cartier piece from the 1920s in the morning, and then get a text from my mother in the afternoon. "Hope you're having fun, dear. Did you remember to pack enough socks? The condescension was a constant, low-level hum in the background of my life. Every family gathering followed the same script. Sophia would detail her latest shopping spree on Rodeo Drive. Mark would hold court about the stock market, and my father would nod along, beaming with pride at the success he could understand. The success that was loud and shiny and conventional. Then all eyes would turn to me. "Maria, you're so quiet. Is everything all right?" my mother would ask, her voice laced with worry. "She's fine, Mom," Sophia would interject. "She's just in her own little world." They discussed my financial situation as if I weren't even in the room. They'd talk about my small apartment, the 10-year-old car I drove, because it was reliable and I didn't care about status symbols, and my lack of a provider husband. It was death by 1,000 cuts. The worst part wasn't the insults themselves, but the genuine belief behind them. They truly saw me as a failure, a burden they had to tolerate with gentle sighs and patient smiles. They had no idea that my small apartment was a deliberate choice to keep my overhead low in the early years, and now it was just a comfortable space I loved. They had no idea that the value of the jewelry I wore to these dinners, always subtle, understated pieces, could have paid for their mortgage several times over. I chose not to enlighten them. Why? I've asked myself that 1,000 times. In the beginning it was fear of their judgment, their dismissal. I was protecting my fragile new venture from their negativity. But as Ethel grew strong and successful, the reason shifted. It became a sort of private, ironic joke, a source of quiet power. I knew the truth. I knew that their entire performance of wealth and success was built on debt and consumerism, while my wealth was real, tangible, and built on my own expertise and hard work. Their power was in their judgment of me. My power was in my knowledge of them. I held all the cards, and I didn't even have to show my hand. I was content in my secret world, with Chloe as my confidant, and my work as my reward. I thought it could go on like that forever. I had underestimated their capacity for cruelty, and I had underestimated the fragility of the world my father had built. The phone call that changed everything came on a rainy Tuesday in October. It was my mother, her voice trembling with a terror I had never heard before. "Maria," she sobbed, "you need to come home. It's your father, it's the business. It's all falling apart." I drove the 2 hours to my parents' house in a state of numb disbelief. The family home, a large, comfortable house that had always seemed like a fortress of stability, now felt like a stage set for a tragedy. My father was in his study, a place that was usually his command center, filled with the scent of leather and old paper and quiet authority. That day, he just looked small. He was slumped in his big leather chair, staring at a stack of papers, his face pale and drawn. My mother was hovering by the door, wringing her hands. Sophia and Mark were already there, standing over him like vultures. The story came out in broken, angry pieces. My father's business, which had been a reliable source of family pride and income for over 40 years, was on the verge of collapse. He had failed to adapt. The market had changed, technology had moved on, but he had stubbornly clung to the old ways, believing that quality and a good reputation were enough. They weren't. A new, more agile competitor had undercut his prices and stolen his biggest clients. He had taken out loans to cover the losses, mortgaged the family home to the hilt, and now the bank was calling in its debts. He was facing bankruptcy, utter ruin. It was a shocking, terrifying revelation. My first instinct was a wave of sympathy for my father, for the humiliation he must be feeling, but that wave was quickly crashed by what happened next. All eyes turned to Mark. He was the banker, the financial whiz, the one who supposedly knew how to navigate these treacherous waters. My mother looked at him with desperate hope. "Mark," she said, her voice a plea. "What can we do? You work at the bank. You must know someone, something." Mark took a deliberate sip of the whiskey he had poured himself and let out a long, theatrical sigh. "Eleanor," he said, addressing my mother by her first name, which was always a power move. "It's a simple matter of poor management." "Frank," he said to my father, who flinched, "you ran this company into the ground. You were too proud to modernize. There's nothing to be done. The debt is too massive. Liquidating is the only option." There was no sympathy in his voice, only cold, brutal judgment. He was enjoying this, I realized. He was relishing my father's downfall, using it to cement his own position as the new patriarch, the successful one. Sophia stood beside him, nodding in agreement, her arm linked through his. "Mark is right, Daddy," she said softly. "You should have listened to him years ago. It was a stunning display of cruelty. They weren't there to help, they were there to gloat." My father seemed to shrink even further into his chair, the fight completely gone out of him. The hope in my mother's eyes died. And then, like a pack of wolves turning on a wounded member, they turned to me. It was Sophia who spoke, her voice suddenly shifting from harsh judgment to a syrupy, manipulative sweetness. "Well," she said, her eyes landing on me, "I guess it's not a total loss. There is one untapped resource we haven't considered." I knew, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, exactly what she was going to say. "Maria," she continued, a bright, false smile on her face. "All that stuff you've collected, your little hobby, you've always said some of it is valuable. It's time to sell it, all of it, for the family." The silence in the study was thick with the weight of her words. Sell it, sell all of it. They weren't asking me, they were telling me. Mark chimed in, leaning back with an air of magnanimous leadership, as if he'd just solved the entire crisis. "Sophia's right, it's the perfect solution. You're not using it, Maria. It's just sitting in your apartment, collecting dust. Be realistic. How much could it be worth? 10, maybe $20,000? It's not much, but it's a start. It would show your father you care. $10 or $20,000. The sheer breathtaking ignorance of that statement almost made me laugh. My current inventory, stored in the vault, was worth well over 7 figures, and that didn't even include my personal collection or the business's liquid assets. They were looking at a mountain of gold and seeing a molehill of sentimental junk. They saw my life's work, the culmination of a decade of passion and expertise, as a piggy bank to be smashed open for their convenience. "It's time you stepped up and contributed for once in your life," Sophia added, her voice hardening. "Mark and I have our own financial obligations. We can't be expected to bail everyone out. You, on the other hand, have no responsibilities. No husband, no children, no real career. It's the least you can do." That was it. That was the line. The least I could do. All those years of quiet tolerance, of biting my tongue, of letting their insults slide off, mate all evaporated in that single, searing moment. They had finally pushed me past the point of passive resistance. My father, the man whose approval I had craved for so long, said nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct their wildly inaccurate assessment of my life or my work. He just sat there, defeated, and his silence was the loudest betrayal of all. He was willing to let them sacrifice me, my passion, my business, what he thought was my little pile of trinkets to save himself. I looked from my sister's smug face to my brother-in-law's arrogant smirk to my father's pathetic silence, and something inside me shifted. The part of me that had always hoped for their love and respect simply died. It withered away, and in its place, something cold and hard and clear began to grow. I didn't get angry. I didn't yell or cry. I just felt a profound and sudden clarity. They would never see me. They would never value me. And I was done trying to make them. I stood up. "You're right," I said, my voice surprisingly calm and even. "You've given me a lot to think about. I need to go and assess what I have. I'll let you know what I decide." Sophia's face broke into a triumphant smile. Mark gave me a patronizing nod. They thought they'd won. They thought the meek, compliant Maria was finally going to do as she was told. I walked out of that house, got into my 10-year-old car, and drove away. But I wasn't going to my apartment to sift through jewelry boxes. I was going to my office. I called Chloe on the way. "Change of plans," I said, my voice steady. "We're moving up the timeline on the Starlight acquisition. And call our lawyer. I want to set up a new shell corporation by the end of the week. I have an idea." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Chloe's voice, low and thrilled. "Oh, this is going to be good," she said. "They finally did it, didn't they? They finally poked the bear." "They did," I replied, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. "And now the bear is going to burn the whole forest down." The Starlight earrings were not just a piece of jewelry. They were a legend in my field. They were a breathtaking pair of Art Deco earrings, crafted in the 1930s by a master jeweler in Paris, featuring two flawless, cornflower blue sapphires, surrounded by a spray of diamonds that were cut to look like a starburst. Their provenance was impeccable, having belonged to a famous actress from the golden age of Hollywood named Isabella Vance. What made them particularly significant, however, was a personal connection. Isabella Vance was my mother's lifelong idol. Growing up, my mother had posters of her on the wall. She watched all her old movies, read every biography. To my mother, Isabella Vance represented the pinnacle of grace, glamour, and elegance. And the starlight earrings were her most famous accessory, the one she wore to the Academy Awards the year she won her only Oscar. For years, the earrings were thought to be lost, having disappeared from public view after Vance's death in the 1980s. But I had a lead. Through a network of contacts I had painstakingly cultivated over the years, I had traced them to the private collection of an elderly baron in Switzerland. He was discreetly looking for a buyer, someone who understood their historical importance and wouldn't just break them up for the stones. For months I had been in delicate negotiations with him. The price was astronomical, the single largest acquisition Ethel had ever considered. It was a risk, but a calculated one. The earrings were a holy grail piece, and owning them would catapult our business into the stratosphere. Chloe and I had planned to make the purchase in the next fiscal year. But after that disastrous family meeting, the timeline changed. They were no longer just a business investment. They were going to be my declaration of independence. They were the perfect symbol. A piece my mother revered, representing a world of glamour my sister desperately tried to emulate, with a value that would shatter their perception of me and my little hobby into a million pieces. The day after the family intervention, I wired the full amount to the Baron's Bank in Zurich. It was a sum that would have not only saved my father's business, but could have bought it 10 times over. The irony was delicious. Chloe, ever the brilliant partner, handled the logistics. The earrings were transported via a high-security courier, insured for a value that made my eyes water, and delivered directly to our vault. When I finally held them in my hands, it was a profound moment. They were more beautiful than any photograph could capture. The sapphires seemed to glow from within, and the diamonds glittered with a cold, brilliant fire. I felt their history, their power. They were my secret weapon. While this was happening, I was playing the role of the dutiful, considering daughter. I'd send my mother vague, placating texts. Still going through things. It's a lot to process. I let my father's calls go to voicemail. Sophia would text me little encouraging messages, which were really just thinly veiled demands for a progress report. Thinking of you. Hope you're realizing what's important. Family first. I would reply with a simple, non-committal thumbs-up emoji. They were so confident, so sure of my compliance, that they left me completely alone. They thought I was in my apartment, weeping over old trinkets, wrestling with the decision to part with them. In reality, I was in a boardroom with my lawyer, Michael. Michael was a shark, the best corporate lawyer in the city. He was sharp, scrupulous, and utterly devoted to his client's interests. I had him on retainer for Ethel, and he was worth every penny. So let me get this straight, he said, leaning back in his chair after I had explained the situation. Your family, who believes you are destitute, has demanded you liquidate your personal assets to bail out your father's failing company. Meanwhile, your actual business, of which they are completely unaware, is successful enough to buy your father's company outright without breaking a sweat. And now, you want me to set up a blind holding company to, what, exactly? He had a glint in his eye. He was enjoying this. I want to be ready, I said. My father is going to have to declare bankruptcy. It's inevitable, just as Mark said. When that happens, his assets will go up for auction. The machinery, the client lists, the real estate. I want to be in a position to acquire them. To save him? Michael asked, raising an eyebrow. No, I said, my voice cold. To own them. I want to buy them for pennies on the dollar, which is what they'll be worth in a bankruptcy sale. I want to do it anonymously through the holding company. And then I want to rebuild the business into something successful, something modern. On my terms. Michael was silent for a moment, a slow smile spreading across his face. Maria, he said. I have represented some of the most ruthless business people in this city for 20 years. And that is the most beautifully cold-blooded, poetic justice-fueled plan I have ever had the pleasure of being a part of. Let's get to work. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in deception, and I discovered a hidden talent for it. On the surface, I was the picture of a woman in quiet crisis. I stopped by my parents' house once, wearing an old sweater and no makeup, my face a carefully constructed mask of worried contemplation. I told them I was having a hard time parting with my sentimental items, but that I understood the gravity of the situation. My mother patted my hand, her eyes full of pity. "I know it's hard, dear," she said, "but it's the right thing to do." My father just grunted, unable to look me in the eye. It was all a performance. A few hours after that visit, I was on a conference call with a team of financial analysts, going over the quarterly reports for Ethel. We were on track to have our best year ever. The acquisition of the Starlight earrings had already generated a massive amount of buzz in the right circles. We had been discreetly approached by a major museum about a potential loan for a future exhibit, a move that would increase their value and our company's prestige exponentially. Meanwhile, my new holding company, which Michael had cheekily named Phoenix Holdings, was officially registered and funded. We were poised and ready for the inevitable collapse of my father's empire. The family group chat was a source of dark, ironic humor. Sophia would post pictures of her new designer handbag or a fancy dinner she and Mark were having, followed by a passive-aggressive, "hope everyone is doing okay" message, clearly directed at me. My aunts and uncles, the enablers, would reply with heart emojis, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding. They were all so wrapped up in the performance of their own lives that they couldn't see the truth. They saw Sophia and Mark as the successful, stable ones, the aspirational power couple. They saw my father as a tragic figure, a king brought low, and they saw me as a footnote, a minor character with a small part to play in the grand family drama. It was the perfect cover. The annual family fundraising gala was the traditional peak of my family's social calendar. It was an event my father's company had sponsored for years, held at a stuffy old country club. This year, despite the company's impending doom, my father insisted on going ahead with it. It was a matter of pride, of keeping up appearances until the very last moment. It was, I realized, the perfect stage for my reveal. The invitation arrived, thick and cream-colored, with elegant cursive font. It felt like a summons. I called Chloe. "It's time," I said. "The gala is in 2 weeks." "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice a mix of excitement and concern. "They're not going to take it well." "Taking it well is not the point," I replied, looking at the small velvet box that now sat in my personal safe. Inside it, the Starlight earrings seemed to hum with latent energy. "The point is the truth. They've been writing my story for me my whole life. It's time I picked up the pen and wrote my own ending." The plan was simple yet devastating. I wouldn't just show up and announce my success. That would be too easy, too crude. I would let them lead. I would let them play out their tired old script one last time. I would let them push me, mock me, and publicly humiliate me. I would let them build the pedestal of their own arrogance as high as they possibly could. And then, with a few calm words and one impossible-to-ignore fashion accessory, I would kick it out from under them. For 2 weeks, I prepared for battle. I chose my armor carefully, a simple, elegant black silk gown from a designer so exclusive I knew they wouldn't recognize the name, but would simply register it as classic. It was designed to be a canvas. A canvas for the earrings. I had them professionally cleaned and checked. I had Michael draw up a 1-page summary of Phoenix Holdings' assets and its legal status, a document I planned to keep in my clutch. The night of the gala, I felt a strange sense of calm. The years of anger, frustration, and hurt had crystallized into a single point of diamond-hard resolve. I was no longer the passive victim in their story. I was the protagonist of my own, and the climax was about to begin. I arrived at the country club deliberately late. The main hall was already buzzing with the low hum of polite conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. It was a sea of familiar faces. Business associates of my father, old family friends, my various aunts, uncles, and cousins, the enablers. They all wore expressions of carefully curated sympathy when they looked at my father, who was standing near the entrance, looking like a ghost in his own tuxedo. I took a deep breath and walked in. A few people nodded at me, their eyes quickly scanning my simple dress before dismissing me. I was, as always, invisible. I spotted my family holding court near the grand staircase. Sophia was in a garish, bright red dress, covered in sequins that screamed, "Look at me." Mark was beside her, laughing loudly at something one of my uncles had said. My mother was fluttering nervously, adjusting my father's bow tie, trying to maintain the facade of normalcy. I made my way over to them, a flute of champagne in my hand. "Maria, you came," my mother said, her relief palpable. She thought my presence meant I had come to my senses, that I was on board with the plan to sell my things. Sophia turned and looked me up and down. Her eyes, trained to recognize brand names and price tags, saw nothing of value on me. "That's a simple dress, Maria," she said, the faintest hint of a sneer in her voice. "Very you." "Thank you, Sophia," I said, smiling sweetly. "You look very bright." Her smile faltered for a second. They didn't notice the earrings. Not yet. My hair was styled in a chic updo, but I had deliberately left a few soft tendrils to partially obscure them. The reveal had to be timed perfectly. For the first hour, I just watched and listened. I was a silent observer at my own execution. I heard the whispers. "Poor Frank, he's lost so much weight. Did you hear? The company is done for. At least he has Sophia and Mark to lean on. They're doing so well." Mark was in his element, pontificating about the economy and giving unsolicited and terrible financial advice to anyone who would listen. He spoke of my father's business failure with a detached, analytical cruelty that made my stomach turn. He was positioning himself as the wise successor, the one who had seen it all coming. Sophia, meanwhile, was performing her role as the glamorous, successful daughter. She talked about their recent trip to Milan, the new wing they were adding to their house, and the exclusive preschool they had gotten their son into. It was a symphony of arrogance, played for an audience of enablers who nodded and smiled, affirming their worldview. No one spoke to me, except to ask if I wanted another drink. I was a piece of furniture, a silent witness to their drama, and I let them dig their own graves with golden shovels. The moment I had been waiting for came during dinner. We were all seated at a large round table in the center of the room, my parents, Sophia and Mark, and a few of my father's oldest, most loyal friends, who were now looking at him with pitying eyes. The conversation inevitably turned to the future, or rather, the lack of one for my father's company. That's when Sophia made her move. She placed her hand on my arm, her face a mask of sisterly concern, and pitched her voice so that the whole table could hear. "On a brighter note," she announced, "Maria has been doing some very serious thinking. She has finally decided to be a team player. She's going to be selling off her collection of trinkets to help Daddy out." Every head at the table turned to me. A wave of murmurs went through the group. "Oh, that's so wonderful of you, Maria. What a good daughter." They were congratulating me for agreeing to my own immolation. Mark leaned forward, a smug look of satisfaction on his face. "It's the smart move," he declared to the table. "In this economy, you can't afford to be sentimental. Cash is king." He then looked directly at me. "So, have you had anything appraised yet? I'm curious what that junk is actually worth. Don't get your hopes up too high." This was it, the moment of maximum condescension. The public stage was set. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, placing the glass down gently on the white linen tablecloth. I looked at Mark, then at Sophia, whose eyes were glittering with triumph. I let the silence hang in the air for a beat too long, making them all lean in just a little. "Actually, I have had a few things appraised recently," I said, my voice calm and clear. It cut through the low chatter of the room. "It's a fascinating process, really. You learn so much." Sophia rolled her eyes, ready to cut me off, but I continued, my voice gaining a new note of authority. "You learn that appearances can be deceiving. You learn that something that looks like a simple trinket to an untrained eye can in fact have a story, a history. That gives it an incredible value." I then turned my head slightly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear, a simple, calculated gesture designed to do one thing: fully reveal the starlight earring. For a second, nothing happened. The light in the dining hall was dim, and they were, as I knew they would be, slow to register what they were seeing. It was my mother who saw them first. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a small, strangled gasp escaped her lips. Her eyes were wide, fixed on my earlobe. "Isabella Vance," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The starlight earrings." Sophia frowned, confused. "What are you talking about, Mom? Don't be ridiculous. Those are just some sparkly fakes Maria probably picked up at a flea market." "Are they?" I asked, my voice still light, conversational. I looked directly at my mother. "You would know better than anyone, Mom. You've seen the photographs 1,000 times. Tell me, do they look like fakes to you?" My mother couldn't speak. She was pale, her mind clearly struggling to connect the world-famous priceless jewels of her idol with her broke daughter, Maria. My father was now staring at me, a deep furrow in his brow. He didn't understand the historical significance, but he understood his wife's reaction. He knew something was happening that was beyond his comprehension. Mark, ever the cynic, scoffed loudly. "Oh, come on. This is absurd. You expect us to believe you're wearing the actual starlight earrings. Do you know what those would be worth? Millions." "It's a pathetic attempt at getting attention, Maria." "You're right about one thing, Mark," I said, finally letting the cold, hard edge into my voice. "They are worth millions. 7.2 million to be precise. That was the sale price. I should know. I was the buyer." The sound of a fork clattering onto a plate was the only noise at the table. It was Mark's. His mouth was slightly agape, the smugness wiped clean from his face, replaced by a mask of stunned, slack-jawed disbelief. Sophia was staring at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. It was like watching a computer trying to process a command that it simply could not compute. Broke Maria, flea market trinkets. $7.2 million. The concepts refused to coexist in her brain. You're lying," she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. It was a desperate little squeak. "You can't be. A buyer? What does that even mean? You don't have a job." "Oh, but I do have a job, Sophia," I said, leaning forward slightly, making sure I had the full attention of everyone at the table. "I have a career, actually. A very successful one. For the past decade, while you all thought I was finding myself, I was building a business. It's called Athel. We are one of the world's leading dealers in authenticated antique and high-provenance jewelry. We have clients in New York, London, Hong Kong. We consult for museums. We partner with the top auction houses. The Starlight earrings were a recent acquisition for our prestige collection." I let that sink in. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, the frantic reshuffling of a decade's worth of assumptions. I saw the faces of my father's friends, their pity for him now mingling with a new, intense curiosity about me. "My little hobby, as you so charmingly called it, Sophia," I continued, my gaze locking with hers, "generated a net profit of just over $3 million last year. And this year, after the press from the Starlight acquisition goes public, we're projected to double that. So, you see, I've been appraising things for a very long time. I'm quite good at it. I know what things are worth." I then turned my attention to my father. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. The shock on his face was absolute. It wasn't just about the money. It was the realization of the sheer scale of his ignorance. He had a daughter who was a world-class expert, a titan in her field, and he had been treating her like a child who needed a handout. "You asked me to sell my things to help the family," I said to him, my voice softening slightly, but losing none of its steel. "You stood by while they called me a failure and demanded I sacrifice my life's work, which you all assumed was worthless. You wanted $10,000 or $20,000 to plug a hole in a sinking ship." I reached into my small clutch bag and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. It was the document Michael had prepared. I smoothed it out on the table. "This is a summary of the assets of a holding company I own. It's called Phoenix Holdings. As you can see, its current liquid assets are more than enough to have saved your company, Dad. I could have written you a check and solved all of your problems weeks ago." My mother let out a sob. Sophia looked like she was going to be sick. My father just stared at the paper, his hands trembling. "So why didn't you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. It was the question I had been waiting for. The entire reason for this elaborate, painful theatre. Because, I said, looking around the table at each of their stunned faces, you didn't ask for my help. You demanded my sacrifice. You didn't see a successful daughter who could have been your partner. You saw a failed daughter who could be your scapegoat. You wanted to smash my piggy bank, not invest in my expertise. And there is a very, very big difference. The fallout from that statement was instantaneous and chaotic. My mother started openly weeping, muttering, "I didn't know, I had no idea," over and over again. Sophia, having finally rebooted from her initial shock, found her voice, and it was filled with pure, undiluted rage. "You're a monster!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling, sequin-covered finger at me. "A monster! You sat there and watched us all suffer, watched Daddy lose everything when you could have helped. You did this on purpose. This is a sick, twisted game to you." Her outburst was so loud that it silenced the nearby tables. People were openly staring now. The public humiliation she had intended for me was now boomeranging back on her with spectacular force. "A game?" I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "Was it a game, Sophia, when you sent me job listings for call centers? Was it a game when you and Mark spent every family dinner for the last 5 years reminding me of what a pathetic failure I was? No, that was your reality. You believed it. The only thing I've done tonight is show you the real reality." I turned to Mark. His face was ashen. The confident, swaggering banker was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he'd just seen his entire portfolio wiped out. He was a numbers guy. He understood what $7.2 million meant. He understood what a $3 million annual profit meant. More importantly, he understood just how spectacularly he had miscalculated. He had backed the wrong horse. He had aligned himself with the loud, flashy, but ultimately hollow part of the family, while completely missing the quiet, unassuming source of real power and wealth. His eyes darted from me to the paper on the table, to my father, and then back to me. He was reevaluating everything, his mind no doubt racing with the implications. "You have to help us, Maria," my mother pleaded, reaching across the table to grab my hand. Her touch felt foreign. "He's your father. This is your family. You can't just let his legacy be destroyed." I gently pulled my hand away. His legacy? His legacy was built on pride and an unwillingness to change. His legacy was letting his own daughter be emotionally abused by her sister under his own roof for years. His legacy was being so blinded by his own narrow view of the world that he couldn't see the success story that was sitting at his own dinner table. Perhaps that's a legacy that deserves to be destroyed, so something new can be built in its place. It was the cruelest thing I had ever said, and it was also the most honest. The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. My father flinched as if I had physically struck him. He finally looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something other than disappointment or detached pride in his eyes. I saw fear. He was afraid of me. He finally understood that the quiet, pliable daughter he had always ignored was gone, and in her place was a stranger, a woman with power and resources he couldn't comprehend, and a will he had fatally underestimated. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he say? Sorry? It was a word that was about a decade too late and several $1 million too short. The show was over. I had said everything I needed to say. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I picked up my clutch, leaving the one-page summary of my assets lying in the middle of the table like a declaration of war. "Thank you all for a memorable evening," I said to the table at large. "It's been illuminating." I turned and walked away, not looking back. I could feel every eye in that room on me, but for the first time I didn't care. Their judgment was meaningless now. It was a currency that had lost all its value. As I walked through the grand doors of the country club and into the cool night air, I didn't feel triumphant or joyful, I just felt quiet. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, empty space. I had finally closed the door on a part of my life that had caused me so much pain. I was free. The days immediately following the gala were a blur of silence and frantic, unanswered communications. My phone buzzed with a relentless barrage of calls and texts from my mother, each one more desperate than the last. They ranged from pleading, "Maria, please, we can talk about this," to guilt-tripping, "Your father isn't eating. He's making himself sick with worry," to outright demanding, You owe this family an explanation. I ignored them all. I had already given my explanation. They just hadn't been listening for the past 10 years. Sophia tried a different tactic. She sent me a long, rambling email that was a bizarre cocktail of apology and accusation. It started with a half-hearted, "I'm sorry if my words hurt you," which is, as you know, the classic non-apology. It then quickly pivoted to how I had deceived them, how I had been arrogant and cruel, and how I had a moral obligation to use my good fortune to fix the mess. She even had the audacity to suggest that my success was probably just a fluke, a lucky break, and that I should be grateful to the family for keeping me humble all those years. I read it, marveled at the sheer, unadulterated narcissism, and then deleted it without a reply. Mark, the great financial genius, was conspicuously silent. I heard through the family grapevine, a distant cousin who had always been kind to me, that he and Sophia were fighting constantly. My revelation had apparently thrown a grenade into their carefully constructed life. Mark's status was built on being the wealthiest, most successful man in the family. He was the one they all turned to for advice. My quiet, hidden success didn't just eclipse his, it made a mockery of it. His entire identity within the family structure had been predicated on my failure. Without poor Maria to look down on, his own position felt suddenly precarious. But the most profound silence was from my father. He didn't call, he didn't text, he didn't email. He just disappeared into his shame. A week after the gala, the official bankruptcy notice was filed. It was all over the local business journal. It was a public humiliation, exactly as he had feared. The company he and his father had built was going to be dismantled and sold off for scraps. The vultures, he knew, would be circling. What he didn't know was that the largest vulture, Phoenix Holdings, was me. Chloe and I watched the proceedings from our office, monitoring every filing, every legal notice. Michael, my lawyer, was handling the bidding process. It was all perfectly legal, anonymous, and ruthless. "Are you sure about this?" Chloe asked me one afternoon, as we looked at the list of assets up for auction. The list included the factory building, the machinery, the client lists, even the company name and logo. "This is a lot more than just poetic justice. This is a hostile takeover of your own family." I looked at the list. I saw the machinery my grandfather had bought. I saw the names of clients my father had cultivated for decades, and I felt nothing. The emotional attachment was gone. I no longer saw it as my father's legacy. I saw it as a poorly managed asset with incredible potential. "My father ran it into the ground because he couldn't let go of the past," I said. "He valued tradition over innovation. I'm not going to make the same mistake. This isn't about him anymore, Chloe. This is about business. It's a good investment. And I'm not my father. I know how to make it work." It was true. I had spent the last few weeks not just planning the acquisition, but creating a comprehensive business plan to completely overhaul and modernize the company. I would rebrand it, streamline the manufacturing process, invest in new technology, and leverage our international network to open up new markets. I wasn't just buying a wreck, I was buying the foundation to build something better. The auction was held online, a cold, impersonal process that suited my mood perfectly. Michael, acting on behalf of the anonymous Phoenix Holdings, placed bids that were just high enough to win, but low enough to be considered a steal. One by one, we acquired every significant asset. The factory, the equipment, the intellectual property. By the end of the day, for a fraction of its former value, I owned my father's entire life's work. The final confirmation email from Michael arrived. "Congratulations, Miss Flores," it read. "You are now the proud owner of everything. What are your instructions?" I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window of my office at the sprawling city below. I had the power, I had the money, I had the victory. The question was, what was I going to do with it? Vengeance was one thing, but building something new? That was a different challenge altogether. My first act as the new, anonymous owner was to send a formal, legally drafted letter to my father. It was sent via courier from Michael's law firm, addressed to him at his home. The letter informed him that the assets of his former company had been purchased by a private investment group called Phoenix Holdings. It went on to state that the new ownership intended to restructure and relaunch the business, and, As a gesture of goodwill and in recognition of his long history with the company, they were prepared to offer him a position. It was not a management role. It was not a consulting role. It was the position of plant floor supervisor. He would be in charge of overseeing the day-to-day operations of the machinery, the very same machinery he had once owned. The salary was fair, even generous for the position, but the demotion was absolute. It was a carefully calibrated move, designed to be both an insult and a lifeline. I was taking away his crown but offering him a helmet. He would have to swallow every last ounce of his pride to accept it, but it would give him a purpose, an income, and a way to climb out of the financial hole he was in. Chloe thought it was a stroke of genius. "You're not just defeating him," she said, reading the draft of the letter. "You're rewriting his entire reality. You're making him an employee in the kingdom he once ruled. It's Shakespearean." I didn't know if it was Shakespearean, but I knew it was necessary. If I had just taken the business and cast him out, he would have become a martyr in the family's eyes. The story would have been, cruel Maria stole her poor father's company. But by offering him a job, a respectable working man's job, I was flipping the script. If he refused, he was too proud to work. If he accepted, he was acknowledging my power. He was trapped. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. I imagined the agonizing debates happening in my parents' house. My mother, practical and terrified, would be urging him to take it. Sophia, horrified by the social demotion, would be telling him it was beneath him. And my father, a man whose entire identity was tied up with being the boss, would be wrestling with a humiliation so profound I could almost taste it from miles away. During this time, I began the quiet work of resurrection. I brought in a team of efficiency experts, engineers, and designers. We walked through the old factory, a place I had only visited a few times as a child. It was dusty and archaic, but the bones were good. The machinery was old but solid. The potential was enormous. We drew up plans to modernize the production line, to digitize the inventory system, to launch a sleek new website with an e-commerce portal. The new company would be called Flores Legacy, a name that was both a tribute and an ironic twist of the knife. It was my legacy now. Finally, a thin envelope arrived at my office, forwarded from Michael's firm. It was a single sheet of paper, a formal letter of acceptance, signed in my father's shaky, unfamiliar handwriting. He had taken the job. He had swallowed his pride. I had won. The first day I walked into the factory as the new, true owner was surreal. I had sent a memo out, signed by the anonymous Board of Phoenix Holdings, announcing that a new CEO would be coming in to oversee the transition. The remaining staff, a skeleton crew who had survived the bankruptcy, were gathered in the break room. They were nervous, expecting a corporate hatchet man to come in and fire them all. And then I walked in. I saw my father standing at the back of the room, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. He was wearing the simple work clothes of a floor supervisor. He looked like a stranger. I stood before the small group of employees, took a deep breath, and introduced myself. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady and clear. "My name is Maria Flores, and I am the new owner and CEO of this company." The collective gasp in the room was audible, but I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at my father. He slowly raised his head, and our eyes met across the room. The shock, the shame, the confusion, it was all there. But underneath it, for the first time, I saw a flicker of something else. Something that looked terrifyingly like respect. The first few months of running Flores Legacy were the most challenging and rewarding of my professional life. The task of transforming a dying 20th century relic into a thriving 21st century business was monumental. But unlike my father, I was not afraid of change, and I was not afraid to bring in experts who knew more than I did. I invested heavily in technology, gutting the old paper-based systems and replacing them with a streamlined, cloud-based ERP system that managed everything from inventory to international shipping. We launched a direct-to-consumer website that was clean, modern, and user-friendly, something my father had always dismissed as a fad. I also diversified our product line, using my knowledge of design and history to introduce new products inspired by classic aesthetics, but produced with modern techniques. It was a fusion of the old and the new, the very thing my father had been unable to achieve. My relationship with my father during this time was bizarre and professional to an almost absurd degree. We only spoke at the factory. I was Miss Flores. He was Frank. I would give him directives, and he would carry them out. He never questioned my decisions. He never offered an opinion, unless I asked for it directly. He was a model employee, punctual, diligent, and utterly defeated. He did his job, and he did it well. He knew the machinery better than anyone, and his expertise on the factory floor was, I had to admit, invaluable. But the old dynamic was gone, replaced by this strange, formal truce. There were no family dinners, no holidays together. The lines of communication with my mother and sister remained severed. I was building my empire, and they were living in the ruins of theirs. The real test came about 6 months in. We landed a massive contract with a European distributor, a deal that would secure the company's profitability for the next 5 years and require us to double our production capacity. It was a huge win, the kind of deal my father, in his prime, would have celebrated for weeks. I called a meeting with the senior staff, which included my father as the plant floor supervisor, to announce the news and discuss the logistics of scaling up. As I laid out the plan, detailing the new equipment we would need to purchase and the 3-shift schedule we would have to implement, I could see the flicker of the old Frank, the old business owner, in my father's eyes. He was excited. He couldn't help it. This was the world he knew. After the meeting, as everyone was filing out, he hung back. It was the first time he had ever done so. "Miss Flores," he said, his voice hesitant. "Maria." I stopped and turned to face him. "Yes, Frank?" "That was a good deal," he said, looking at the conference table, not at me. "A very good deal. The kind of deal I always dreamed of making." "It is," I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. "It's a game changer for the company." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a complex storm of emotions, pride, regret, and a deep aching sadness. "I was wrong," he said, his voice thick. "About everything. About you. I was a proud, stupid old man. I let my ego, my fear of being left behind, blind me. I see that now. I see what you've built, here and with your other business. It's incredible. It was the apology I had waited my whole life to hear, and now that it was here, I didn't know how to react. The vengeful part of me wanted to say, it's too late. But the person standing in front of me wasn't the powerful, dismissive patriarch I had overthrown. He was just a man, humbled and broken by his own mistakes, finally seeing the truth. "You taught me the value of quality, Dad," I said, the word dad feeling strange on my tongue after so long. "You taught me that a product should be built to last. I just added a new chapter to the story. That's all." He nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "Your grandmother would have been so proud of you," he whispered. It was a simple statement, but it was a peace offering, a recognition of the passion he had once dismissed. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a return to the way things were. It was something new, a fragile, tentative beginning. I simply nodded, turned, and walked back to my office, leaving him standing there in the hallway. The war was over. The question now was how to live in the peace. While I was building my new empire and forging a fragile, professional peace with my father, Sophia and Mark's world was quietly imploding. Without the family business to prop up their lifestyle, and with my father no longer a source of financial security, their high-flying life began to look a lot less sustainable. Mark's bravado had always been built on a foundation of my father's quiet wealth and the social standing it provided. With that gone, he was just another mid-level banker, with an expensive mortgage and a taste for things he couldn't really afford. Their problems started, as they so often do, with money. I learned through my cousin that Mark had made a series of risky, speculative investments, trying to quickly make a fortune to rival mine. He was trying to prove he was still the financial genius, the smart one. But he wasn't a genius, he was a gambler, and his bets didn't pay off. He lost a significant amount of their savings, a fact he tried to hide from Sophia for months. The cracks in their perfect facade began to show. The trips to Europe stopped. The designer shopping sprees ceased. Sophia, who had built her entire identity around being the wife of a wealthy man, didn't know how to cope with a shrinking budget. She had no skills of her own, no career to fall back on. Her only currency was her husband's success, and that currency was devaluing by the day. Their fighting became the stuff of family legend. They argued about money, about status, about me. Sophia, I was told, was obsessed with me. She would stalk my company's social media, read articles about Ethel's success, and then rail at Mark for not being able to provide her with the same. She couldn't accept that my success was earned through work and expertise, not luck. In her mind, I had stolen the life that was rightfully hers. The final blow came when Mark's bank announced a round of layoffs. In the new, leaner economic climate, his department was being downsized. The flashy, high-risk-taking bankers were out. The steady, cautious ones were in. Mark, with his recent string of bad personal investments and his reputation for arrogance, was one of the first to be let go. The news sent a shockwave through the family. Mark, the golden boy, was unemployed. Sophia, the princess, was now the wife of an unemployed man. They had to sell their big house, the one with the new wing they had bragged about, and move into a much smaller rental in a less fashionable suburb. It was a spectacular fall from grace, made all the more painful because it was so public. I felt a grim, satisfying sense of schadenfreude, I won't lie. It was poetic justice in its purest form. They had spent years judging me based on their narrow, materialistic values, and now those same values were the source of their undoing. They had built their house on sand, and the tide had finally come in. I never reached out to them. I never offered a word of sympathy or a dollar of assistance. This was a mess of their own making. They had sown the wind, and now they were reaping the whirlwind. My mother, however, couldn't maintain the silence. She called me one evening, her voice thin and weary. "Sophia is not doing well, Maria," she said. "Mark is looking for work, but it's hard. They're struggling." She asked if you would consider giving Mark a job at the new company. I almost laughed out loud. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. After everything that had happened, they still saw me as a resource to be tapped, a solution to their problems. "No," I said, my voice flat and final. "Absolutely not." "But he's your brother-in-law, he's family," she cried. "No, Mom," I said, the words coming out cold and clear. "He is the man who called my life's work junk, and offered me a job in a call center. He is the man who gloated over my father's ruin. He is not family, he is a liability. And I do not invest in liabilities." I hung up the phone. The cycle of them underestimating me, and then turning to me for help, was now, finally, broken for good. A year after the gala, Flora's legacy was not only stable, it was a recognized leader in its industry. We had created new jobs, revitalized a community, and our products were winning design awards. My father, to my genuine surprise, had thrived in his new role. Freed from the stress of ownership and the pretense of being the boss, he had rediscovered his love for the craft itself. He became a mentor to the younger workers on the floor, teaching them the old techniques, his pride now rooted in the quality of the work, not the size of his office. Our relationship had settled into a quiet, respectful rhythm. We would have coffee in the break room sometimes, talking about production schedules or the quality of a new batch of raw materials. We never spoke of the past, of Sophia, or of my mother. It was an unspoken truce. We had found a way to be in each other's lives, but it was a new life, with new rules. The old family was gone. Ethel, my firstborn business, continued to flourish under Chloe's brilliant day-to-day management, allowing me to focus on the big-picture strategy for both companies. The Starlight earrings had become our calling card, a symbol of our expertise and market power. We had loaned them to the Metropolitan Museum of Art for their exhibit on 20th century jewelry, a move that generated international press and cemented our reputation. I was happy. Genuinely, peacefully happy. It was a quiet, solid happiness, not the loud, performative kind Sophia had always chased. It was the happiness of a life built on my own terms, of work that I loved, and of relationships based on mutual respect. One afternoon, I received an unexpected invitation. It was for a small dinner party at the home of a distant aunt, one of the few enablers who had reached out to me after the dust settled with a quiet, sincere apology. "I should have said something years ago, Maria," she had told me over the phone. "I just didn't want to make waves. I was wrong." It was a simple admission, but it meant a lot. Her invitation was for a family get-together. "Just a few of us," she wrote. "Your father and mother are coming, and Sophia and Mark will be there. I think it's time we all tried to be in the same room again." My first instinct was to decline. Why would I subject myself to that? I had nothing to say to them, and I certainly didn't need their validation. But then I thought about it. I wasn't the same person who had sat silently at those dinners for years. I was not afraid of them anymore. Their opinions held no power over me. Perhaps, I thought, it was time to close the final chapter. Not for them, but for me. To go back to the scene of the crime, not as a victim, but as the victor, and to see for myself what was left. I decided to go. And just for the hell of it, just for the sheer, delicious irony of it all, I decided to wear the earrings. Walking into my aunt's house felt like stepping into a time machine, but this time I was the one at the controls. The same group of family members was there, the same cast of characters, but the entire dynamic had been irrevocably altered. The atmosphere was thick with a tense, awkward politeness. My arrival caused a ripple of silence. All eyes went to me, then immediately to the familiar, brilliant sparkle at my ears. The starlight earrings were no longer a secret weapon, they were a statement of fact, an undeniable symbol of the new world order. Sophia and Mark were sitting on a couch in the corner, looking small and diminished. Sophia had gained weight, and her face was puffy. She wore a simple, inexpensive dress, a far cry from her usual sequined armor. Mark looked tired and grey. He stared at his hands, avoiding eye contact with everyone. They looked like ghosts haunting the memory of their former lives. My mother rushed over to me, her face a mess of anxiety. "Maria, thank you for coming," she whispered, her eyes pleading with me to be merciful. "Please, let's just have a nice quiet evening." I gave her a small, tight smile. "That depends on them, doesn't it?" I said, nodding towards the couch. My father was there, standing with my uncle. He saw me, saw the earrings, and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a look of acknowledgement. He knew what I was doing. He understood the power play. He didn't approve, but he understood it. Dinner was a painfully stilted affair. The conversation was all safe, trivial small talk about the weather, sports, a new show on television. Everyone was desperately avoiding the giant diamond and sapphire elephant in the room. Sophia and Mark said nothing, picking at their food in silence. The vibrant, arrogant, talkative couple who had once dominated every family gathering were now mute. It was my aunt who finally broke the tension. She was a kind woman, but not a subtle one. "Well, Maria," she said, her voice a little too loud, "it's just so wonderful to see you looking so well. We are all so incredibly proud of everything you've accomplished, both with Flores' legacy and your other amazing business." It was a conversational grenade, tossed right into the middle of the table. Sophia flinched. Mark's head sank even lower. My mother looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Sophia finally looked up, her eyes, red-rimmed and full of a bitter, resentful fire, locking onto mine. "It must be nice," she said, her voice a low, trembling hiss. "To have everything you ever wanted. To build your success on the ruins of your own family. The old Maria would have shrunk from the accusation. The old Maria would have felt a pang of guilt. But the new Maria just took a calm sip of her wine." I placed the glass down and looked at my sister, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical pity. "You're wrong, Sophia," I said, my voice even and gentle, which I knew would be more infuriating than shouting. "I didn't build my success on the family's ruins. The family was already in ruins long before I did anything. It was ruined by pride, by arrogance, by a refusal to see the world as it is, instead of how you wanted it to be. It was ruined by people who valued brand names more than character, and who thought judging others made them taller." I let my gaze drift to Mark, who still refused to look at me. "My success wasn't built on your failure. My success was built while you were all busy talking about it. It was built with hard work, expertise, and a passion for something real. Something you never bothered to understand, or even ask about." I then looked back at Sophia. "The only thing I took from the ruins," I said, "was the opportunity to build something better, and I have. If that bothers you, I suggest you try building something of your own. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you stop tearing other people down." The silence that followed was absolute. I had not raised my voice. I had not insulted her. I had simply told the truth. and it was more devastating than any insult could ever be. Sophia's face crumpled. She pushed her chair back, stood up, and fled the room, a choked sob escaping her lips. Mark, after a moment of hesitation, got up and followed her, a man dutifully following his queen into exile. The war was finally, truly, over, and I hadn't had to fire a single shot. The dinner party ended shortly after Sophia and Mark's dramatic exit. The remaining family members, my aunt, my uncles, my parents, were left in a state of awkward, stunned silence. No one knew what to say. I had not been the villain they might have secretly feared, nor the magnanimous saviour they might have hoped for. I had simply been honest, and my honesty had acted as a mirror, forcing everyone to see the last decade for what it truly was. It was uncomfortable, but it was also, in a strange way, a relief. The lies and pretenses were finally gone. As I was getting ready to leave, my mother caught me at the door. "Was that necessary, Maria?" she asked, her voice weary. "To be so blunt?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "It was. For 10 years I was the family's silent shock absorber. I soaked up all the judgment, all the condescension, all the pity. I did it to keep the peace. But it wasn't peace, Mom. It was a dysfunctional, one-sided truce that was slowly killing me. Tonight wasn't about being blunt. It was about declining to play that role ever again." I could see a flicker of understanding in her eyes, mixed with the deep, ingrained habit of wanting to smooth things over. She was an enabler, not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated fear of conflict. She had spent her whole life prioritizing a fragile, artificial harmony over difficult truths. "Your father, he's different now," she said, changing the subject. "The job has been good for him. He seems calmer. He's a good employee," I said, the words clinical but true. "He respects the work." We both knew we were talking about more than just the factory. We were talking about respect for me. I left the party and drove home, feeling a sense of profound and final closure. The ghosts of the past had been faced and, if not entirely exorcised, then at least put in their proper place. They no longer had the power to haunt me. The next day, I went back to work. There were orders to fill, clients to call, and a business to run. My life was no longer defined by my family's drama. It was defined by my own actions, my own ambitions, and my own creations. A few weeks later, I received a short, handwritten letter in the mail. The return address was the small rental house in the suburbs. It was from Mark. I almost threw it away, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The letter was just a few sentences long. It was not an apology, not in the way most people would define it. It was a confession. "I have been thinking a lot about what you said," he wrote, "about building something. For years, I thought my job was to manage money, but I see now that I was just managing appearances. I never built anything. I just moved numbers around. I underestimated you. That was a fatal business error. You were right about everything. I am starting over. I am going back to school to get a trade certification. I am going to learn how to build things with my hands. I don't expect you to reply. I just wanted you to know." It was the most honest thing I had ever heard from him. It was a surrender, a recognition that his entire worldview had been flawed. It wasn't a plea for a job or for forgiveness. It was simply a statement of fact. I read the letter, folded it, and put it away. It was an unexpected epilogue to his story, and perhaps the beginning of a better one for him. I found that, to my surprise, I hoped he would succeed. Not for my sake, or for Sophia's, but for his. Everyone deserves a chance to build something real. Life settled into a new, peaceful, and productive rhythm. Flora's legacy became a model of modern manufacturing, and my father continued to be a valued, respected part of the team. Our relationship remained professional, but a quiet warmth had begun to seep into the cracks. We started having lunch together once a week in the factory canteen, talking about the business. He would tell stories about my grandfather, about the early days of the company, and I would tell him about my travels for Ethel, about the history of the pieces I was acquiring. We were two experts in our fields, finally learning from each other. He never asked me for money for himself or for my mother, and I never offered. The job I gave him was enough. It had given him back his dignity, not as an owner but as a craftsman, and that, I realized, was what he had truly lost. My mother, slowly, began to build a bridge. Her calls became less about guilt and more about genuine interest in my life. She would ask about my work, about Chloe, about my happiness. She stopped mentioning Sophia. It was her way of respecting the new boundary I had drawn. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. It was a relationship being rebuilt on a new foundation of honesty. As for Ethel, it reached heights I had never even dreamed of. Our name became synonymous with quality, trust, and unparalleled expertise. We opened a small, by-appointment-only showroom in New York, a beautiful, discreet space where our most valued clients could view pieces in person. Chloe and I were a powerhouse team, two women who had built an empire on a shared passion and a deep, abiding friendship. One day, Chloe and I were having coffee in my office, looking over the designs for the new showroom. "You know," she said, looking at me over the rim of her mug, "I was thinking about that first day I came to your apartment, the one with the polishing wheel next to the coffee maker." I smiled at the memory. "What a mess." "No," she said, her expression serious. "It was a crucible. You were forging something in there. I don't think you even knew how powerful it was going to be. Do you ever miss it? The secret? The anonymity?" I thought about it for a moment. I thought about the quiet nights of research, the thrill of the hunt, the private joke of my double life. "Sometimes," I admitted, "I miss the simplicity of it, but I don't miss the reason for it. I don't miss having to hide who I was to protect myself from the people who were supposed to love me the most." I looked around my office, at the plans for our New York expansion, at the latest industry journal on my desk with a feature article about Ethel. I thought about the respectful nod from my father in the factory, the genuine interest in my mother's voice, the letter from Mark admitting his failure. I had done more than just win a war. I had changed the very landscape of my life. The starlight earrings were now housed in a custom-built display in our new showroom, the centerpiece of our collection. They were no longer my personal armor. They had done their job. Now, they were back to being what they always were, a breathtakingly beautiful piece of history, a testament to artistry and endurance. I didn't need to wear them anymore. My own success, my own peace of mind, was the only jewel I needed. I had become my own vindication. A few years have passed since that final, fateful dinner party. The world has kept turning, and the lives of everyone involved have continued to evolve. Flores Legacy is now an international company. My father retired last year, and at his retirement party, thrown by the employees he had mentored, he gave a speech. He didn't talk about profits or market share. He talked about the pride of making something well, and he talked about his daughter, who had seen the future and had the courage to build it. It was, in its own way, a public passing of the torch, and a final, healing acknowledgement of my journey. He and my mother live a quiet life now, their relationship with me settled into a comfortable, respectful distance. We see each other on major holidays, and the conversations are pleasant and real. The old tensions are gone, replaced by a shared understanding of all that was lost, and all that has been, surprisingly, gained. I heard from my aunt that Sophia and Mark did in fact start over. Mark completed his trade certification, and now runs a small but respected custom cabinetry business. He builds things with his hands, real, tangible things. Sophia, forced to reckon with a life without the safety net of family money or a high-flying husband, went back to school and became a paralegal. They are, by all accounts, just a normal, middle-class couple, their days of glitz and glamour a distant memory. I have never spoken to them again, and I am content with that. Some doors are best left closed. As for me, my life is full and rich in ways I could never have imagined all those years ago in my small apartment. Ethel has become more than a business. It's a legacy of celebrating and preserving the stories of the past. Chloe remains my partner and my closest friend, the ally who saw my potential when no one else did. My own story, the one I'm telling you right now, has become a kind of founding myth for me. It's a reminder of where I came from, and of the power that can be found in being underestimated. It taught me that true wealth isn't about what you own, but what you build. It taught me that sometimes the most empowering thing you can do is to stop waiting for others to see your worth and to simply and unapologetically claim it for yourself. Sometimes, when I'm in our New York showroom, I'll stand in front of the display case that holds the starlight earrings. They still glitter with that same cold, brilliant fire. They are a reminder of a turning point, a battle won. But they are also a reminder that the most valuable things in life, respect, independence, and peace, are the things you can't buy. You have to earn them. You have to fight for them. And once you have them, they shine brighter than any diamond.